Pteraxii, probably one of the most hated models in the shop just because of the wings. The black, red, and tan on the inside is always a challenging paint scheme, but I'm going to show you how to make it easier. First of all, you want to prep your models, make sure that they are easy to access for painting. Best way to do that is to drill a hole in the back of one of these engines because you're never going to see it. It's a little bit thin to try and pin this connection spike, and you don't want to weaken that with something that's easy to clip. When transporting or playing the game, you're going to be knocking it off all the time because it's got 3 tiny little connection ports, so we're going to leave those alone, and we're just going to pin in the back of the engine here. So now we have a nice good handhold on the wire. Same thing for this guy. You can actually pin into the hole that this spike goes in the back, and that gives you a nice good handhold without interrupting or destroying anything that's visible later on assembling. So we're going to start by blacking these out. They've already been primed, assembled of course, and just broken down into 2 parts. For blacking them out, I'm using my Vallejo black surface primer through the airbrush because that's where it goes, and just applying a thin coat of black. It was primed in black, but the primer isn't as dense. You can see here it's a lot darker with the black primer. We want to make sure we got a good black for our reds that we're going to lay in first. For the wings, I only worried about where the black was really going to be. We're going to have to end up hitting that anyway. For the inside, I didn't black out these areas because it's going to be tan. There's no reason to get a really dark black on there and then fight it back up. So now that the black is dry, I'm going to go in with my Bombay white India ink and do a controlled highlight. So the red areas on here are these reinforcing arms that run up the outside of the wings and the engines. We're going to ignore this center section being red. These guys have a surprisingly small amount of red anyway, and that red makes it way more difficult to paint these models when it comes to masking. The part that runs all the way down the center tail spike, not at this level. Alright, and then we're going to pick a highlight area to move through and just fade on the wings, working our way around the object so we don't forget anything. A little bit of an overspray there, but everything worked out. And I'm going to do the tip of this little beam here. Kind of follow it a little bit on the other side. Same here over here on this arm. Just kind of matching it, evening it out. And making sure that we get the upper area for sure. Those little spikes. And then the center of the engine, just highlighting it like it's a cylinder. Moving around my object as things dry, making sure my white is really knocked in. I'm going to turn my compressor off so you guys don't have to listen to it and keep painting, because I have a 10-gallon compressor. And I could probably paint for the next 30 minutes without worrying about it charging. I use a lot of air. I paid for that compressor. So the air is free now. For now. Careful who you vote for. No politics in 40K. Alright, so this is the highlighting pattern that we're going to go with for our wings here. Might brighten this side up just a little bit more. That away in the squeaky foam. Now these guys, their mask, chest armor, and codpiece are red. And that is the only parts of these guys that I could identify that were red. It seems like a waste to just airbrush those 3 small things. But the Army has an airbrushed red. And to keep things consistent, I'm gonna airbrush the red on these guys too, because it would look really different, and I don't want it to look different. I'm just shooting through his hoses here to hit the plate behind, because that is the only access that we have. Speaking of access, time for his cod piece. Got that in there. Go from face to crotch here. Alright, and there's nothing else on this guy. Just those 3 small areas that we're going to have be red, and then we're going to be painting around everything else. So I'm going to let that dry for a second, and then we're going to put our Blood Angels contrast on. Blood Angels contrast time. Already got it loaded up here in my handy dandy spray air gun brush. And I'm gonna layer my red in. I want to do this slowly and controlled. It's already painting it fast for us, so we don't need to speed it up by opening up the airbrush and going, hey, there, we're red. Let it build up nice and slow. You get your best fades that way. Just like taking thin coats of paint. You see these areas now? Looks like he's in the red light district of Amsterdam. Getting his shop on. You can use the black areas as kind of a buffer to work your red into, because we know that we're going to be painting over that. I'll come over to the wings, get his turbine. So here's my thing. Is it a jetpack? Or is it wings? Or is it both? Could they not get one working really well, so they put both on there? I don't know. Working our reds in, tickling them in, getting them nice and saturated, making sure we don't have any whites left over. Giving us that nice rich fade. Our blacks have turned to I have a dark mahogany. It's funny, my first YouTube video about contrast was airbrushing contrast. I still get comments how stupid I was for doing that. Everybody's airbrushing contrasts. Nobody's calling them stupid. I won't say I did it first. But I did it pretty quick. Alright, there we go. Nice, cool fade. A lot of work done for us. We're going to punch in those reds with some yellow. I put too much paint in my airbrush every time. Yellow ink loaded in the airbrush. This is to punch our red. Make sure that we're getting a nice, vibrant red. The brightness in red comes from yellow while maintaining saturation. As soon as you add white to red, it is pink. And then if you add purple and white, you're playing with magenta. But magenta pigments really, I like to get purer forms, not mixed to magenta. Can mix to a Merlot or a burgundy pretty well. But so here's our red punched up with the yellow. Adds a ton more vibrance. We're not as worried about the back of the model being as bright as the front. The front is where the detail is. You're going to look at the back. Your opponent's going to look at the front. I'm going to hit these wings with a matte varnish. Army painter. Watch your ears. We're going to let that dry for a little while. 15-20 minutes is pushing it. maybe 30. If you're doing a whole bunch of them, you can give it some time, let it dry, and then we're going to use sticky tack to mask all these little areas and then go back in and airbrush our fades for the wings. Might need to use some liquid mask. I'll see how accurate I can get with the sticky tack, but once we airbrush these areas black, we might need to go back in and hand paint some lines, just because this is such a close interaction with a mask, and usually you only do those with like a liquid mask. Let me get this matte varnished and stop yammering. While that matte varnish is drying on our wings, we can start on the metallic steel on the body of your Pteraxii. The T is silent, just like in French. Now, the steel and the silver, because I've been using the silver, are so close. These are kind of interchangeable, especially if you're putting a wash over them. And this one's stopped up. Keep a thumbtack close to my station so I can poke my paints. Now I'm going to use a Series 7 for this. The Series 7 is a little bit more worn. You can see paint build up next to the ferrule. The tip's a little rounded, so I am not as concerned about ruining this brush because it's already sort of poopy. The reason I'm using an air paint for this step is because the air paints coat like a dream. People don't really believe me. I have to take them into my shop and be like, look how awesome this paint is. It's amazing. It's quick. It saves you time. It's weird that the thicker, like game color silvers and things are thin. That's not to say that they don't have their uses in painting, but for base coats, meh. Base coats, different story. Base coats, you go to the Model Air Silver range, or metallics range. Now the golds and the bronzes and the coppers are still kind of when it comes to coverage, but that is just the nature of the pigment. For those, I tend to use the liquid golds, coppers, called rich gold, old gold, new gold, whichever. But you see how easy this is going on. You don't have to be super careful with this step because we are going back and painting with black. The only places you do need to be careful are close to where we've painted red, because we don't want to cover those again. And we have gotten all of our silver steel applied to our figure. You can see there's some areas that are messy. Doesn't matter, they're going to be cleaned up later. We're just interested in getting the steel on so we can do a wash. Now while that dries, that took a minute, so we can come over and mask our wings. We've got some sticky tack here. The sticky tack, or poster tack, is from Office Depot. I think it is their brand. The trick to this stuff is to warm it up so that it moves a little bit better. Some people use what's that stuff? Silly putty. It kind of likes to move on its own. This stuff stays in place. A preference thing. There's no, if you can use a thing and use it well, use it. There's no qualms about that sort of stuff. So what I want to do is go in and kind of carefully mask off areas by shaping this, applying it in a conservative manner, and then going in and using either a sculpting tool or the backside of a brush to push it into place. Now let me grab, I have some silicone tip sculpting tools like these sort of guys that come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but that helps me to kind of push, because I can't get my finger down in there as well as this thing can get down in there, and it just doesn't stick to the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and do this to the whole thing, show you how I masked it off, and then we'll be ready for the next step. So we've got our masking applied now. Hard to get these little guys, and making sure that we're kind of connecting through the centers here so we don't get color down in there. I'm going to do the tan first because the black is easier to spray. Tan's going to take more layers. There's more chance of that tan hitting objects we don't want to from bloom of. Taking my Vallejo primer black, we're going to hit this backside real quick. Try to keep my hands a little bit farther back when I'm doing this, just so the airflow has less to bounce off of, so I don't risk getting as much black on my tan. I'm really just going for the areas that need the black. Some areas are still like really black, and there's no reason to go in and repaint those if I can avoid it. I'll look on the other side. We're good. We're golden. We don't have any black on our tan, and so we've now got our 3 main colors on, again, one of the hardest pieces in the Admech army to paint. The next hard bit is getting the spines, but well, let me not forget about actually highlighting our black. For highlighting the black, I'm going to take some of this engine gray, Vallejo model air color 48. Just straight into the airbrush, no thinning needed. I'm going to go in and do the same thing that we did on the back, which is kind of aim for the circular area here. And then pull it up. Pull it up. Pull it up. And you can see the difference that makes between the sides. Get more of a accent. For these small areas, I'm just going to kind of roll it down the edge. So just going across the edge of the what do you call it? Panel? Panel. Good word for it. And then reinforce on the tips. It kind of connects the roll to the right spot, and we'll go in and edge highlight these things later, but right now I think that looks pretty smooth. So we got our Terran khaki loaded in the airbrush. Little test spray here, and we're gonna hit the inside of the wings. So that is their look. It's the inside of the wings, that bright khaki. Again, let it layer up slow. Do multiple coats. Thinner coats are better. Then thick ones. I'm going to let this dry for a second. Also see a little bit of dust that we caught right here on the inside of the wing, so I'm going to make sure we get rid of that too. So if dust gets kicked up in the air and it gets into the path of the airbrush, it can like stick it. So wait till your part dries and take a brush that is dry, and you can see like that piece of dust kind of masked off the wings, and just push it off the model. I had somebody come in and drop off a bunch of boxes, so they must have had a decent amount of dust flying around when I did this step. That's a good way to, yeah, if your dog comes in, shakes, you know, for being outside, could kick up some stuff and get it in the air. Just want to make sure that we keep things quality. And you can see this paint's really dry, and all I'm doing is relying on the texture of that little bit of fiber that's on there, knocking that off, scrubbing it. And you can kind of see the little dark spots where the dust was. Just making sure that we can get all that off of there. Use my finger a little bit. There we go. Got it looking good again. And then we'll continue airbrushing. So what I did is I went over to the hair dryer and just sort of dried it off a little bit more before scraping at it. Get a little bit more pressure through the airbrush. There we go. Man, and we got a clog. I felt a chunk come out of this paint when I was working, and we found it. The nozzle found it. Now we're spraying again. A lot of clogs you could just address by working the nozzle in and out, working the needle in and out, and it'll push a clog just right through the airbrush instead of like having to dig it out from the other side by taking it apart. So always try that first. Before you take it apart. You can see we're starting to get a really nice tan here. I'm going to use a little bit of air just from the airbrush and put some more layers on. Make sure I'm getting my tip. And you'll see if this is, you see how it's propagating just a little bit to the black. But since we're spraying from one side, we are fine. We're not going to have to mask an entire side while we're spraying. And now for a fade, I'm going to add a little bit of my Bombay ink to my airbrush. And just let that sort of mix on its own. Add a little bit of water, kind of stir it up. Just to make use of that little bit of khaki that's still in there. And then I'm gonna could do like kind of the centers of, and push them up. So like spray, aiming like in the middle of this circular area. I am tripping over words all day today. Just pull it into the center point there so we're getting kind of a nice graduation of that shape. Same thing on the other side here. Gonna just kind of reverse my grip. Since I can't airbrush with my left hand quite yet. Put a little bit more on the tips here. Make them look a little more dangerous. balanced out pretty well. Now we got our really cool fade, and the back is still pretty black, so we're going to load up some black. I'm going to clean out the airbrush, make sure it's spraying good, and we'll do our fades on this side. So once you've let that dry for a little bit, it's time to go in and remove our mask. Remember, anytime you leave masking on for a long period of time, it's going to become more difficult to remove. Now these steps I did in pretty quick succession here, so I should have a pretty easy pull. Don't worry about the little bits that are stuck. We will address those in a minute. But there is nothing on this planet more satisfying, well, that's an exaggeration for sure, than peeling a mask off and having it come off so clean. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of this, and probably, well, not probably, I'm going to hit it with yet another varnish step. I want to do that because we have a very porous tan surface here, and when we go in to paint those veins, that paint is going to travel. Ooh, I pulled a stick. I'm going to have to re-glue that. Oh no, that's okay. Just bend it a little bit. I'm going to get the rest of this off here and then show you, not do it on camera, not risk breaking other stuff. Just a quick tip for getting these little bits off that are stuck when you use sticky tack is just you reactivate, and you can push and grab. See, that one came off. This one's being a little booger. There we go. Came off, but you just kind of press again and pull that off. We got like a little bit right there in that crack. See, it pulls it right out. So just reactivate your sticky tack by pulling it about, and then you get the extra off. Final product all demasked. You can see there's two tiny areas in here that we're going to go back in and just touch up with some hand paint. There's maybe one right there. This is all going to be steel, so that's kind of our buffer zone. And then on the other side, pretty good. A little tiny spot right there. A little tiny spot again, same spot on the other side. Everything else looks good. Our red's nice and solid. We're going to drop a wash here, so we're not too worried about that intersection. Going to go ahead and add my matte varnish to this guy. Then we'll get ready to paint some steel. When your varnish is dry, it is time for the challenging bit, which is to paint the ribs in the wings without getting it on the wings. Trick is to go light, have your matte varnish on there, and just hold your breath with every brush pull. If you do get a little bit on there when you're painting, immediately get some water on your brush and try to wipe away, dry it off, rinse out your brush, come back, wipe it off. You'll see it propagate because that sparkle, the glitter in this paint won't go away really, but you can get the majority of it off, and the trick is to just keep it really wet and active and try and scrub and soak as much off as possible. So I'm gonna paint all the silver on this, another fairly long step. We've got this little piece of glued again back here that popped off when we pulled our masking off. A little tiny connection point there. We're going to paint all of it silver, and I'll come back and show you those pieces. Alright, we got our silvers on. Probably the most tedious silver you can apply in the Admech army. Got a few little overages on the spines here and there. There's one right there. As you're pulling the brush, sometimes the bristle will get away from you, especially at the end of the brush stroke. But we're going to use black wash on this side to clean up. So some of this, you see, this is an example of tiding right there, where it found a little bit of a porous area and just pushed its way through. And then here we need to add some black wash. We can correct these with edge highlights or corner highlights, as I like to call them, later on in the process. But for now, we're going to go in, we're going to add black wash to all these little areas. So here you can see examples of the wash added to the ribs here. The key to this, as I choke, is to get a very heavy brush load. Start at the top of wherever you're holding it from. I like to pull toward the bottom of the fin and just push the wash along. We're going to touch just a little bit here at the bottom just to black out, so you get that really nice clean vein in between the panels of the glider. I'll show you one more time. Pretty good brush load here with my liner. Make sure that the bristle is going to travel along the inside of the vein here. Just let it go, and I'm going to wipe the end of the tip there. So that cleans that up. We'll clean this area up as well. The liners like to get a hook in them, so I take the rounded part and pull that along instead of like letting the hook go to one side or trying to put the hook down, because when you do that it kind of splays the bristles a little bit. So even with an older liner you can just use the rounded kind of ski it along the top of the vein. Alrighty, we got our black washes on. So now it is time to edge highlight. Oh, I missed one little spot there. I always see it on the camera. So I just did a little bit of black wash in these connection joints. Those are going to be gold. We need a little deep shadow there, separation. Did not do any washes on the actual veins. We're going to go back and we're going to use the tan to shore up any sort of mistakes that we have there. So we're waiting for a highlight step with that tan. Back here, the washes worked great. Masked any of the little overages that we had. So for our red edge highlights, we're going to take a mixture of Khador red and Khador red highlight, or Khador base red and Khador red highlight. For our edge highlight, we're going to take about a 25% increase in value worth of our highlight. So just stepping it up just a little bit, and then we'll trace these edges with the side of our brush, not the tip. Just drag it along the surface and you get those nice pops. It shows you the shape. If you have any areas down in here that too much tan is showing through, you can take a little bit of your red and some black, because that's what the color is. It's red over black. So if you mix a little bit of black and red, you'll get about the same color, and you can go in and spot. You know, I got one right here. See, you can go in and then just feather it out a little bit, so that gets rid of that little spot where he had some tan poking through. So just something to look at while you're edge highlighting. You got those colors active, you know. Take a little bit of that shadow color and knock it into the areas where you want to make it look just a little bit cleaner. We got all our edge highlighting done on our reds here, so you can see where I've gone in and add some highlights, and again progressively sort of cleaning up areas as I'm noticing them with the edge highlights. From here we're going to go ahead and apply our liquid gold. So these little bars here from the reference are gold or brass or bronze. So we're going to go in and paint those as accents. I don't see anything else on the wings that will be gold, but I will come back and give you a reference of where those areas are painted on the figure and on the wings. So the gold we're using is a Vallejo liquid gold. I want to use crappy brushes with it, tiny brushes with almost no body, because we don't want it to soak up the paint. The reason I use this stuff is I really like how it coats. It's basically one brush stroke. So it saves time, reduces error, because we only have to do one brush stroke. One brush stroke is one stroke to mess up on instead of two. So I'll go in and paint all these gold areas now. When you're done with your liquid gold, this guy, the rich gold, clean up is isopropyl alcohol. Got a bottle of 90%, and I just jiggle the brush around in there like I'm trying to beat the snot out of it. And then you can see a little bit of gold pulled out there at the base near the the ferrule, because it will soak up that resin. This is why we use the crappy brush, because you don't want to wash natural fiber hairs. This one's getting about done. It's about time to find a new one. So you get like 5 models or a few sessions with a brush before it's done. After we get our gold done, take our Reichland Flesh Shade here, and we're going to shade all our gold areas. So, as promised, these are the areas that are gold. We've got the back of the sword as well, the filigree and collar, little rivet here, and then on his back he's got the cog, and then on the wings here we did all those little cylinders, those little ones up here on the vertical stabilizer. So we're going to wash all that with the Reichland Flesh Shade. Alright, gold's dry. We're going to add some of our Reichland just to show you. Go heavy. Always go heavy with your washes, unless you're doing something besides washing with them. You want to get that nice rich red tone in your golds. Once your Reichland Flesh Shade is dry, it's time to dry brush your steel, just to get some nice highlights in the brighter areas and to give your brass a more natural highlight. Go in and hit brighten up. We're not trying to wash anything out. It's real nice, quick strokes. We're using a little tiny dry brush here from Knights of the Game Table. And see, just picking up these edges so we get some more defined area. Go in here and hit these pipes and a little speaker and things. Pick some high points out on these little orbs. And just go through. Same thing on the wings. Just be careful about your pan. Once you get your dry brushing done, it's time to block in the blacks on the body. So anything that's fabric, keep in mind that we do have straps that we're going to be painting brown with our contrast later on. So you don't have to address those as much. We also want to get some hoses, and there's some little wires here that run underneath the mask in between these little breather tubes, amplification tubes. I don't know if that's where he gives orders or not. After you get your blacks in, you're going to take a little bit of mix of the black and that Space Wolves looking blue. This one.
No, maybe you survived it.
And then once you get it like fairly dark, we're going to add highlights to our legs. Legs, hoses, all the things that need highlights. Pick out the folds in the cloth that are sticking out a little bit further. We'll clean those up in a second. We're just kind of demonstrating how that blue interacts with the red, really makes that red pop out. And we want to take that neutral black and shift it just a little bit blue. Once you get your blacks highlighted, we're going to go in with our Terran khaki and paint our straps. So this guy's got a lot of little leg straps and hidden straps all over him. So what I did before is I painted the little buckle, and then I'll just kind of dab in the center of that to get my tan in there. And carefully go around and hit all these little straps that go all the way around his legs. They go back into the back around here and then around right there as well. So mark them for you. See right there, there, and then these two are the ones that meet up in front. And then after we get done painting those, we're going to use our snakebite leather over the top. So after you get your khaki on there, we're going to use our contrast snakebite leather because it's cool. It's magical. And we're just going to put that over all of our straps. And where you have your buckles, we're going to go in and just do like a little dot on top so that it flows down into there. And if you get too much, you just wipe your brush off and soak it up. so you can see a little bit of that fold of fabric poking through. So now that we've got our brown straps finished, we've got our contrast on there. It dries with a nice sort of weathered look here around the body, keeping his wings on. We're going to move on to our accents. So we got our Signar blue highlight that we're going to use as our accent color. We're going to do the eyes and some of the energy weapons. Since he is an alpha, he needs some blingy weapons. He's got his extra lenses up here. So we're going to do a base coat blue, and for the lenses it's okay to go outside the lens a little bit, get sort of that glow effect. And then we're going to go into the channels here on the weapon. So these little vents. And we're going to do that on both sides. For these vents, we're going to take a little bit of white, if that white is still wet. Sometimes you can take a little bit of water, reactivated paint. If it's been sitting on your wet palette, my wet palette's getting kind of dry. And then we're going to take this lighter blue, put it down at the bottom, so that on each side you get kind of a glow effect that goes around. And you can do several layers of this if you want. I would just say don't go all the way up to white, because you don't want to wash out that energy color and you don't want to take attention away from it. And when you go to a neutral color like white, you're kind of taking your contrast out. At this point, we are ready to assemble the rest of the figure, which means just glue on the wings. I have gone in, I did my little Nike swoosh with the same sort of mixed white with blue over here to get our highlight, and then just a little white dot, so just 2 layers. You can use a wash too to darken it up if you want. For this one, his eyes were pretty small and they look nice and glowy. He does not have a lot of accents like the other models. So went ahead and did these weapons and stuff. So each of those vents have that. When you're gluing, so I'm going to take this guy and spin this little pin out of his back. Sit him there on a nice clean blanket. Same thing with that pin. Make sure to scrape your plastic. You don't want to glue into plastic. So we have a joint here. I'll take my X-Acto knife and rough it up. I'll rough this up too. And then this little pin here, I'm gonna just scrape kind of around the edge. And then for here, so this I don't need to because the pin was protecting. But here, I need to rough that up just a little bit. I need to rough this little ball up. And then I'm going to take my super glue, decide which object I want to put the glue on. Usually I put it kind of in the receiver. I got a nasty glue tip. Some of the guys around the shop are pretty rough on glue tips. So I get a little bulb of super glue going, dollop. If there's too much, don't be afraid to wipe some away, because you don't want it running everywhere, squishing out the seam. So I'm just going to tear a little bit off of this paper towel here, and just take off some of the glue. Little dab, get it out of there. And then with these guys, I like to line up the holes, the little bulbs, and then sort of rotate at the same time. push. I got a lot of little sensitive parts, so be careful. And then we're gonna push and hold here for the next 3 days until it's dry. And I'm just gonna sit here. Now I'm gonna stop the video and let it dry. For our bases for these guys, we're gonna go ahead and glue down this clear part to the base, and we're gonna wrap this with parafilm to protect it from glue fog before we do our sand. And then we'll paint it with our masking on and then just unwrap it, so we'll maintain our clear rod. I personally like to paint mine black because it just kind of blends in a little bit more. The clear is actually really reflective and draws your eye in, so I like to do mine as a matte black, but that's preference, and we're doing these clear. It's basing time. So this had to dry for a while. I usually will use super glue, use a little sifter to lay down the sand, and then spritz it with some of the aerosol kicker. I just don't want my paint to get mixed in with that kicker. See if my airbrush is clean enough to actually use right now. Now I'm going to use my Surface Primer Model Air Black just to black out the base. I hate hand painting sand. It's annoying. I've masked off my stem because it had to be glued down. I'm going to use this as a nice little handle. And just blacken out my base. Nice full pulls of the trigger. Make sure I'm getting all the little brown spots, getting it nice and dark. It's the theme for the bases of this army. It's just a basic wasteland. After your black is dry, it is time to dry brush. And for that, we are using the blue-gray pale. See here, and our Arctic white. Using the blue-gray pale because it is a good contrast to our red army. Start from the front of the base and work our way back because we want brighter colors at the front of the base. Just simple bases for these guys. Tufts and things like that can be added later if desired. Now add some of my white, unload, and brighten up the front. It's almost like a mix of the white and the blue-gray pale because you see it's still visible on the paper towel where we cleaned out. Trying to avoid my base so I don't have to go back and paint my ring, which it looks like I did a pretty good job of. I'm going to just take this parafilm off. I wrapped it on there pretty good. I didn't need this much. I went overboard. So I'm not going to force you to watch me struggle with that. Alright, so I've got my masking off. I've taken an X-Acto and scored this plastic. I score this stuff because it's pretty slick, and you know, the better hold you can have, the better. The better is better. A little bit of our thick CA glue. And then there is a little nub at the back. You can see it's kind of scratched up here. And that is our connection point. Put it on there. Rotate it forward a little bit. Get them nice and dynamic. And then sit here and hold it for 40 minutes. And there we have it. We're dry. Finished Pteraxii. We got the slow manual spin about. Let you see where all the parts and pieces are. There are some things that I went off camera and didn't mention, like a little strap over his forehead. I did the touch-ups on the wings off camera. I had gotten paint on one of the hoses. I think I went and touched that up. Nope, I'm going to go touch that up right after I finish recording. But this is the finished guy. Let me know if you have any questions. As always, happy to help. And happy painting.